name is Megan Griffith. I'm calling from the New Brunswick Human Rights Commission. How are you?
Hi, Megan. I'm doing pretty good. I was just wondering if the New Brunswick Human Rights Commission recognized as a service provider that they're bound and obligated to recognize the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights.
We only can act on things that fall under the New Brunswick Human Rights Act. So in New Brunswick, the New Brunswick Human Rights Act supersedes most other legislation.
Except this one. Except this one that you're not familiar with, right?
It's an international instrument. It's a convention on political and other beliefs. Is that what it is?
So you're not familiar with it, right?
Well, there's a number of conventions and instruments that are related to human rights, however, aren't necessarily applied through our legislation here in New Brunswick.
This applies through all of Canada. This is a federal law. It's written in the Emergencies Act as ratified law in Canada, just like the Criminal Code. It would be like the Human Rights Commission saying, well, we don't respect the Criminal Code in New Brunswick. We only go by New Brunswick laws. So this is a federal law.
Specific question relating to how that particular piece of legislation or would apply?
Yeah, I would like to speak to somebody that's familiar with the law at your commission, somebody that understands this instrument is binding upon every public servant in Canada, because I can see that you're not familiar with the law, and it would be pointless in us continuing the conversation. So if you have somebody there, I'm sure at the New Brunswick Human Rights Commission, there must be somebody that understands the law, a lawyer or somebody that's hired to review cases.
Oh, well, you don't have to worry about that. I certainly understand the law as it applies in New Brunswick.
So you do understand the Criminal Code applies to New Brunswick then, right?
Of course I do.
Okay, then the Emergencies Act also applies to New Brunswick because it's a law.
What's your particular question?
Well,
do you feel you've been discriminated against? Do you have a particular concern?
No, I'm an advocate. I'm an advocate for somebody that's in New Brunswick. I'm a Christian minister, and what I do is I try to find out if the people that are in positions of, like the Human Rights Commission, adjudicating human rights, are familiar with the instrument that applies to them. And when I find out that they're not, then I try to find somebody in their organization that's familiar with the law, so I can send them the International Covenant, so I can send them the Library of Parliament document, so they can familiarize themselves with the duty to accommodate.
We're certainly very familiar with that and familiar with the duty to accommodate. Given that you've identified that the individual you're advocating for is I'm assuming Christian, you said you're a Christian minister?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so are they looking to be accommodated on the basis of their religion?
Well, yes, and I've seen that, and they would of course have to make an application for that, but what I'm just trying is, the focal point is that there seems to be a misunderstanding with regards to the breadth and the depth of international law as to being applicable to every service provider in Canada. That doesn't mean just federal government employees. That means every service provider in Canada, Costco stores, the airlines, the utility companies. They're all bound by this international covenant, and it's rather disturbing that you're not aware of that.
I'm not saying I'm not aware of it. What I'm saying is that not all covenants are applied in legislation here in New Brunswick. So if you're talking about a religious accommodation, that absolutely is included in our legislation and likely has been triggered by a number of international instruments, so they recognize that as a protected characteristic. We do have that as a protected characteristic in New Brunswick, and therefore would want to ensure that service providers, employers, housing, landlords, all of that would respect that, and it is part of our act. Therefore, whether it originated from a particular international instrument or signed agreement, it is a protected characteristic under our act that would allow someone to file a complaint under it.
Well, that's good to hear. The trouble that I have is the particular brother that's in New Brunswick there, he's of the same faith I am, and because of his faith, there's one word that stands in the way of him using provincial legislation, because it doesn't cover him as a man. Provincial legislation only applies to persons, which is quite a different word in law. And so because of his faith and beliefs in that King James Bible that says he can't respect persons, He can only point to that international covenant that respects and recognizes him as a man in Article 3 and Article 1's right of self-determination that he determines as being the opposite of termination. Self-termination would be suicide. So the opposite of that is resurrection. And in Christ, it's his blood that offers us that to come out of the dead world, that person world. The scripture, again, is replete with information that God is no respecter of persons. It uses that word exclusively. So that's very difficult for most employees to catch on to. So that's why I just point to the Bible and say, well, it's right there. The Queen swore to defend it. We have an act of Parliament called the Royal Style and Titles Act. It says there she's the defender of the faith. When provincial legislation tends to attack your faith by telling you the only way you can use this is if you're a person, well, then we have to go to that international covenant that recognizes us as men and women in Article 3. That's the only position in law in the world that recognizes a man and a woman. All the rest of the law is only applicable to persons.
So you're stating that this individual feels that they are unable to file a complaint or to be accommodated because they identify as a man and not a person.
Correct. And that international...
Under our legislation, we would see those as one and the same. It would not prohibit him from filing a complaint with us.
What I'm saying is he can't make use of your provincial legislation because it's only applicable to persons. It's not, oh, well, we'll just change the word and pretend it's not there. It doesn't work that way.
Our definition of persons would include both male and female.
Well, as a corporate entity, he can't show respect to that. So that's the demand for accommodation. He wants men and women to offer equity so that he can have his faith realized, recognized, and it won't be trod upon. He wants to have the King James Bible as the rule of law in the proceedings, and the people that are conducting the proceedings to show what hardship having that King James Bible as the rule of law in those proceedings is going to bring upon them.
Well, certainly he could file a complaint with us and we could investigate it further.
Well, I hope you understand that what I'm talking about dishevels the whole corporate system of subjecting people to statute, code, and regulation, and it puts the man in charge with the Bible beside him. That's never been done before in Canadian law, but the law allows it if you demand it. I'd like to show me in a Royal Style and Titles Act world where she's styled as defender of the faith, how does somebody not get to defend their faith with the Bible? That's the situation here, and that's never been done before.
Well, certainly if the individual wanted to file a complaint, we could look into it further. I can say, regardless of if he identifies as a man or as a person, we would accept the complaint and be able to inquire further into it.
Well, how do we get you to recognize that covenant is binding upon you as service providers? I'm not making that up. The Supreme Court of Canada has said that.
Are you saying that you want our legislation changed to say man and woman? Is that what you're saying?
No, not at all. No, I just want you to recognize your obligation and duty to that international covenant that's written in 180 of the Criminal Code. If you make somebody feel...
How is it currently not being recognized by the Human Rights Commission in New Brunswick?
You're saying that you don't recognize the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights.
I'm not saying we don't recognize it. I'm
as
saying
binding. As binding. I'm sorry.
You're interrupting me.
Sorry.
What I'm saying to you is that in New Brunswick, under our Human Rights Act, we have a number of protected grounds which are all derived from international instruments, covenants, all of those types of legal and binding documents that have therefore trickled down through the federal government to the provincial government and been codified in our law here in New Brunswick. I'm not saying we don't recognize a specific one. What I'm saying is that our purview to act is based on what is in our legislation, which does include religion and creed, as well as 16 other protected grounds.
So if somebody came with a demand that you recognize the International Covenant and they wanted that to be given as the rule so that they could bring in the Bible, would you do so, or would you look for reasons not to?
They would need to file a complaint with us indicating that they felt they had been discriminated against by the prohibition of them having their preferred or their religious text or Bible or Quran or whatever it would be. They would have to file a complaint. We would inquire into it further to better understand where the failure to accommodate was. My understanding is the failure to accommodate is not currently with the Human Rights Commission. It's with a court system, if I'm understanding correctly.
Well, yeah, we can't go through the court system unless we can get a court of inherent jurisdiction, which we have tried to do And the judges, being very authoritarian, recognize they're going to lose jurisdiction, so they fight like tooth and nail not to let go. When you ask a judge, is this a court of inherent jurisdiction? They always want to come back with a bunch of questions instead of answering yes. Now, if they won't answer yes, well, obviously they're not a court of inherent jurisdiction. They're a secular admiralty court trying to gain authority over you by contract. So that presents a problem. As soon as we go there, right away the judges start intimidating us and violating the 423 of the criminal code. But they don't care, because if you go to the police to say, I want this judge charged, they laugh at you and say, go talk to your politician. So we got a real problem.
You could file a complaint, or the individual involved could file a complaint on the basis that they felt they were not being accommodated by the court, or that they were being treated unfairly due to their religious beliefs.
I would like to think that that's true, but here in Alberta, when I went to the Alberta Human Rights Commission to file a complaint on the identical premise, they refused to even talk to me. They hung up on me, and then I found out that Peter Lemieux, the head of security for the province of Alberta, had told them to hang up on me and not listen to any of my calls.
Well, we certainly haven't received that direction here, so
no,
if you want
okay,
to file a complaint
all right.
you could.
All right, so I will direct then the brother there to communicate to you and do the appropriate steps to get this in process. And I do appreciate your ability to communicate with me in such a professional manner. I do appreciate that very much, and I thank you for that. And I look forward to hearing back. And is there an email address that I can send to there?
Yeah, it's HRC, like Human Rights Commission, HRC.
Yes. CDP, yeah.
Yeah, at gnb.ca.
At GOV.
No, just GNB. Government of New Brunswick, GNB.
Oh, okay, GNB.
Yes.
.com?
.ca.
.ca, okay. So I've got HRC CDP at GNB.ca.
And there's a period between HRC and CDP.
Okay. Very good. And what was your first name?
It's Megan.
Megan, thank you so much for your call, Megan. I appreciate your time.
No problem. You have a good day.
You too. God bless. Bye-bye.